So today we're very excited to welcome Randy Hain, a business leader, executive coach, and devout practicing Catholic, to talk to us today about authentic Catholic leadership. During our conversation, we'll dive into some of the key principles of leadership based on Randy's business and coaching experience and uncover a few actionable insights that you can bring back to your parish, school, ministry, or diocese. I also want to thank everybody who submitted questions for today's conversation. There was an overwhelming amount of interest in our topic today, and I've woven some of your questions into our discussion with Randy. We're also giving away some of Randy's books after the show. If you're watching live right now, we've automatically entered you into a random drawing. Brandon, our producer, will be in touch in the next day or two if your name is selected so you can claim your book. Thank you, Randy, for your generosity in sending us many copies, including your most recent title, Becoming a More Thoughtful Leader, to give away for this show. And Randy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to be with you guys. Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here, Randy. Randy, before we dive in, could you share a little bit about your background with our audience, and then we'll dive into a great conversation today.
Sure. No, listen, thanks again for having me. Just a quick blurb. I'm a husband and father. I've got two adult sons, Alex and Ryan. I've been married to Sandra for 30 years next month. And let's see, came into the Catholic Church 18 years ago. My wife was baptized Catholic, not confirmed, and she was pursuing coming into the church 18 years ago, and asked me if I would join her on that journey, and it has transformed our lives, and it's been an amazing experience to be Catholic, and we're so grateful for our faith. I was a senior executive in business for 25 years before I started my own executive coaching and leadership consulting businesses 13 years ago. And somewhere along the way, I started writing books about 15 years ago, and try to do my best to be a good husband, dad, and friend, and work in my parish. So I have a busy life, but I love the life I lead. I'm grateful for it.
Excellent. Thank you, Randy. And man, as I said at the beginning, there was an overwhelming amount of interest in this particular topic, and thank you again for joining us to talk about it. I think it's so important in the church today to talk about leadership.
Sure.
And this common thread came through in some of the questions that I was reading, and it really revolves around trust and trust in the church, trust in leadership. I think, unfortunately, we've seen at various levels in the church some erosion of trust occur. Mm-hmm. Could you talk about the importance of trust for leaders, not only internally in organizations, but also, especially in the church, out the external facing? Can you talk about how important trust is, and how does someone go about regaining trust once it's lost?
That's a great question, Mike. And I think about that, I guess, through the lens of both a Catholic and a business person. So I guess the first thing I would ask us to think about, do people see Christ at work in us? Do we show up as authentically Catholic? Are we living out our faith in a way that it's noticeable to other people? And I don't mean waving a Catholic banner, wearing the Catholic t-shirt. It's more of through our actions, the way we treat others. Do people see Christ at work in us? So I think, from a Catholic context, we should always be carrying him around with us in a way that people see him there. I think the element of trust, though, I think that's a great question. And if I may, I'd like to share something that I use in my professional life. It's something that I call the trust formula. And we teach this to leadership teams and executives every day, every week. And the trust formula is very simple. I wish I had a whiteboard to show you, but it's a formula where it's authenticity plus vulnerability multiplied by credibility is what yields trust. So authenticity plus vulnerability times credibility equals trust. And if you think about the trust formula, there are two ways to look at it. One is, am I showing up as trustworthy to the people around me? Do I have trust issues? Do people not trust me? Well, am I showing up as authentic? How am I doing in that area? Do people get to experience the real me when they're with me? Vulnerability, very difficult sometimes for us to show, but am I willing to share glimpses of the real me, of the life that I lead? Can I talk about the things that are difficult for me? Can I admit that I've made mistakes? Can I tell people that I've failed? all forms of vulnerability. And then credibility is the multiplier, because I think we'd agree, Mike, that anything times zero equals zero.
Of course.
So you have to have credibility, and credibility comes in many forms. Do I do what I say I will do? Am I a person of my word? Do I follow up in communication? Am I responsive? Do I show courtesy and gratitude to others in our interactions? There's so many different ways we can look at credibility. We all may define it differently. But if you take those three behaviors and you use the formula, you can start to see, wow, maybe I've got some work to do in terms of how I'm showing up. And then if you flip it to my point earlier, am I having problems trusting people around me? How are they showing up in the formula? And do I have a coaching opportunity where I can maybe sit down with them and walk them through where maybe they've got deficits? Maybe I can help them grow and help build trust between us. So that's what I do in my professional life, and I hope that's applicable to what you're asking me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And shifting gears a little bit, but still related to leadership, I think another question that we saw come through was how can, I'm specifically thinking here of a parish priest. We've seen a lot of, obviously we know church staff is spread so thin. And priests are really having to step up. We're seeing a lot of transfers. How can, with that turnover in parishes sometimes, how can trust and also leadership be sort of maintained through that?
So, I would never place myself, in the shoes of our wonderful priest. It's a very difficult role. You're the shepherd of the flock. You're the leader of a quite frankly, a large business enterprise. There's so many stresses and things that pull at you every single day. So, God bless all of you who are in that role. We're grateful. But I do think about, in my own experience, watching priests come and go from our parish community and others that I've known. And one of the things that must be difficult for priests, but it is something that maybe is an area to address, is it's probably hard to quickly form trusting relationships. I don't know how long I'm going to be here. Maybe I'm only here for a year. It's going to be difficult to get to know all the parishioners. How deep do I go? Do I really have time for this? I mean, these are all things that I think probably go through people's minds. But my encouragement would be, and I follow this in my own life. I'm a high functioning introvert and relationships matter, but I have to be really careful and thoughtful about how I build those relationships. I treat every encounter with another person as a wonderful, rare opportunity. I may have 5 minutes, I may have an hour. I don't know how long I've got with you, but I really want to get to know you. I want to hear your story. I'll ask you to tell me your story. Give me the life outside of work. Tell me about who you are. I'm going to listen very carefully. I want to really listen for what's going on. I may even ask you, what's good, or maybe what are you struggling with right now? And I find that if I do that at the beginning of a conversation, I usually can expose what this person is going through, the joys, the sufferings, maybe whatever's going on. And then I have an opportunity to choose how I respond. And maybe in that moment, I want to be a good listener right now. Do you want to tell me more? Maybe I need to schedule time for us to meet at another time because I'm really busy with something else, but I want to hear this. Can I have coffee with you tomorrow at the parish? But we've got to start by asking questions and listening, and then we can determine how much time we can invest. I find that so many people are just wanting to be heard. And I would say that about the secular world, the faith world, they just want to be heard. So asking questions is a really great act of kindness. And then we have to listen and do something with what we hear. There's a chapter in one of my books where I say that the three biggest imperatives for every leader is to ask, listen, and invest. Ask, listen, and invest. And I would say this to our parish leaders: you have an opportunity when someone comes into your orbit to do just that. So that would be my response.
And we talked about this before we went live, but you're naturally an introvert. In fact, it's your first chapter of your most recent book where you speak about that.
Yeah.
And when God's calling young men to consider the priesthood, they're not natural born leaders, where some of that can sort of be sorted out and weeded out. in the more secular world. What advice would you give to a leader who's a little bit more reserved or shy in terms of how they can cultivate that leadership role, and maybe also some tips on how they can improve their decision-making skills when they're maybe not comfortable with that? Or, you see these scenarios, the 26-year-old priest right out of seminary, maybe he spent a year as an associate pastor, is now thrown into the mix of an existing organization that has had, potentially a parish secretary that's been there for 30 years. I know I asked a few questions there, but could you kind of talk to us about, either a younger leader or someone who's not always comfortable stepping into that decision-making leadership role? What advice could you give them?
That's a great question. And if I missed any of these questions, I want you to come back and hold me
Of
accountable,
course.
please. So, I will be the first to tell you that the loudest voices and the biggest personalities are not necessarily the greatest leaders. In my experience, it's quite the opposite. I find that the quieter leaders, the people that have a gravitas, a quiet presence, the people that build relationships, one cup of coffee at a time, those are often the most amazing leaders. So don't associate extroversion with great leadership. So I just want to kind of put that out there for us to consider. So to kind of get into some of the meat of what you were asking, if I was a young priest right out of seminary, or a young leader in any business for that matter, I would say, first of all, be authentic, be yourself. What did Oscar Wilde say? Be yourself, everyone else is already taken. Just be you, because at the end of the day, people are going to respond to, want to connect to, want to engage with the real you. So even if you're nervous, you've got imposter syndrome, you wonder, why would anybody want to spend time with me? Bring that self out, and the people that really get you, the people that really value you, they're going to find you and they're going to gravitate to you. So I think start by being yourself. I think the other element of, around building relationships, maybe you're coming into a new company, a new parish, is I always advocate starting with one-on-one meetings. That's a very safe way, especially for us introverts, to get to know people. Now, I know it's time consuming, but I'm not the guy that wants to hold a reception for 500 parishioners and work the room. That scares me to death. In fact, I wouldn't even show up if you invited me. But if you said, hey, listen, Randy, can I put, 10 people on your calendar a week for a 30-minute cup of coffee? Absolutely. Because I can get to know them. I could go deep. I could build a beginning of a relationship. And I can do it in a way that doesn't make me super uncomfortable. So be authentic. Find your medium when it comes to how you build relationships, and do it. There is not one size fits all. There isn't. The chapter that Mike's alluding to is called Confessions of a High Functioning Introvert. And I knew I was an introvert in my teen years, but it took getting a diagnosis from an industrial psychologist and some testing for me to embrace it. But then I found all these strategies that I can employ that have helped me be very effective. Caffeine helps, just a side tip. So I think be authentic, be yourself, and find your way of doing this. And it can be unique to you. You don't have to do what everyone else is doing.
So sort of following the scenario out a little bit more, let's say this young leader, or really any leader, walks into a situation, eyes wide open, very excited,
Sure.
and then they realize there's a lot of dysfunction going on. I mean, the church, after all, is 2,000 years old. There's a lot of red tape and bureaucracy.
Sure.
How can someone that wants to make an impact and make a change navigate through some level of dysfunction? I'm sure you see this in companies and organizations as well outside of the church.
So, there are probably two levels of dysfunction. There is the church is on fire and we better put out the fire. That's one level of dysfunction, and we certainly have to respond to those needs. But then there is more of a lower level dysfunction. We've got some people that are, really not fitting in. We've got some folks that are, kind of hard to work with, where, we've got leaders in ministry that probably should not be in the role. There's other kinds of dysfunction. So what I advocate to my business clients that I think is a good strategy that transcends business, it's applicable in nonprofits and faith organizations, is to go on a listening tour. I would absolutely go and just spend some time listening, which goes back to our earlier topic of relationships. And I'm an introvert. Maybe I don't know how to fit in. Go out and just start listening to people. Tell me what you're seeing. What are two things you love about the parish? What are two things you wish we could change? What are three things that you'd love to see me do in the next year if you could wave a magic wand? So just going out and asking some of those questions will generate probably all of the insight you need about, now I know what my top 10 list looks like. You also probably have been discerning, these are the people that seem best able to help me. I think I see some people that truly have a heart for service that want to help. I can recruit them and enlist them to help me with this. But I think I would start with a listening tour. It's always served me well, and it's something I advocate for.
Through that listening, you're sure to uncover different people's interests, their talents,
Sure.
what they like to do, what they love to do, and maybe someone's not quite in the role of what they love to do.
Mhm.
Could you talk a little bit about delegation and to kind of tie the two together? Leaders, especially potentially if they're going into a dysfunctional situation, might feel like they have to put all of this on their back. And I love your point of beginning with listening, but could you talk about once a leader is ready to kind of get down to the core work of their job in their position, talk about the importance of delegation.
Mhm.
And this was a question that actually came up from our audience. How does a leader, while delegating, make sure that they still have a job? I found that question very interesting.
Yeah. So eh, let's look at the scenario you've given me. Okay, I've done my listening tour, and we've got to get some things done. Wait, but who can I trust? Where can I delegate? You know, I would always tell a leader that your job is to make those around you successful. Your job is not doing everything yourself. It's impossible, physically impossible, for the head of a parish, the head of a company to do everything. So you have to rely on others, and ultimately, your success is going to be measured by how well you drive the task side of your job through others. Certainly, there are things that are exclusive to our pastors and our priests. We know what those are, and certainly to be the shepherd of the flock and all of those things, the sacramental side of the church. But the administrative side, which is an enormous area, you've got to get those things done through others. So I think as you're encountering people and trying to figure out, what can I give you? What are you capable of? Well, if we've been listening, we probably have figured out who's got passion for what. I've taken notes, and I know that these people have passion for ministry. These people are really good with details and numbers or whatever. And maybe you start by giving them some small assignments so they can prove themselves. I'd love to introduce you to a concept called author versus editor. So I would always tell my leaders that you want to be the editor 80 to 90% of the time. You don't want to be the author, because when you're authoring someone else's work, you're doing two jobs. You're doing your job and their job. What you want to do is get people to do their own work and show you something you can respond to. It's something, quite frankly, that we use in parenting. If I made my children's bed and did their laundry until they were 21, they're not going to be really, well-adjusted adults able to live on their own. So in the parish, if you've got someone that needs to put together a project plan, even if they've never done it before, I would say, look, I have faith in you. I know you can do this. Will you at least show me your best draft by Friday? I'd love to look at it with you. And they've gone down the path of ownership. They own it. Even if it's 50% of what you want, it's better than nothing. So you start to train them and coach them and get the work to the level it needs to be. But begin with this idea of, I need to be the editor versus the author when it comes to delegation. And I think it's going to be probably a 6-month window, it typically is in business, to really discern who are the able-bodied people here and who can I rely on. But here's my caution to you. Don't burn out your able people. Don't burn out the folks that can do things well, because you may have a core of 5 people that are amazing. Those 5 people can't do everything. So you've always got to have a mindset to be not only a leader, but a leader that develops others that can step in and do the things that need to be done. And then, Mike, one thing you asked me that I want to address is the real fear of, well, if I develop someone to do this job, will that mean that I lose my job? I would always encourage us to take a leap of faith here, that if I pour into people around me, if I teach them what I know, if I develop them, then God is going to open a door somewhere, somehow, for that person to thrive, but also for me to thrive. One of the greatest acts of leadership, but also of kindness, is to pour yourself into other people. So I would never have the fear of losing my job. Another opportunity may appear for you, and this person can backfill you. But we should always look at people around us as, you've been given to me to invest in, and I take that seriously. And what a privilege that I've been given.
Mm. I want to shift gears a little bit to
Sure.
some chapters that I earmarked from your book that just came out last month. We'll talk about this a little bit more towards the end, but becoming a more thoughtful leader.
Sure.
And this is just getting into some practicals. One thing that I saw recurring as I read through some of your other books, and it also came up in this book, is the importance of meetings and not having too many, not having too little, having an agenda set. And I even had to reflect on the way I run my own meetings here at eCatholic. Could you speak a little bit towards to how meetings can be a time suck or they can be productive, and maybe some practical tips that our leaders can take away to have more effective meetings?
So I'll begin with a very practical exercise because meetings are the bane of existence in every secular organization, I assume in parish life as well. So I would start by doing an audit of your calendar. If you want to do something really useful today, go back and look at your calendar for the last 2 weeks. Maybe even print the calendar. In fact, I would. Take a highlighter and highlight every meeting, phone call, whatever you did each day. Highlight each one that was not productive. In retrospect, we had a really nice conversation, but we didn't actually get anything done. Hey, we were together for 4 hours, but we talked in circles for 4 hours. Or I met with Susan. You know what? Susan probably needed to meet with Deacon Mike. So I really didn't need to have that meeting. I want you to look back and do a retrospective. These are all the areas, the days, the minutes of the day where I was probably wasting my time. And if you're like most people in the business world, you may find that you wasted fully half of your day each day. That's typical. So I know there's a problem. You probably know there's a problem, but how do we fix it, to Mike's point? So one of the things I teach and preach and practice is be very, very clear about where you need to say no. Saying no is a leadership superpower. Now, no does not have to be harsh and mean. Mike, I will not be on your podcast. Get out of here. I mean, that's rather harsh. Why would I say that? Instead, it might be, hey, Mike, listen, thanks for inviting me. I've really got a full calendar for the next month, but sometime in November might be a better time for me. Can we look after Thanksgiving? I'd love to be on your podcast, but right now I'm just not available. So I said no to Mike, but I let him know that I'm open, I'm interested. I even suggested maybe the end of November. That's a very easy strategy. Instead of saying yes to everything, start saying no and give alternatives. I've been practicing that for 30 years. Hey, I can't make the 5 o'clock meeting, but tomorrow at 8 and 3 o'clock, I am available. Which one of those options would work for you? So it's a yes and, it's not a yes but. So be willing to say no. Also, have agendas. Oh my goodness. Agendas would save us so much grief and time. They don't have to be elaborate. They could just be some bullet points, but let people know this is why we're meeting. This is the role that you have in the meeting. This is how long it will last. This is what we're going to try to accomplish. And before the meeting is over, very important, make sure that everyone knows what they're responsible for. I cannot tell you how many times I've been in meetings with senior executives where the end of the meeting is basically the CEO announces, hey, we've got to fix the sales problem. Let's go make it happen. What do I do with that? Those are real meetings I've been in, by the way. What do you do with that? Instead, we want to do something like, hey, listen, Mike, you're responsible for generating the new sales plan. I need that on my desk by 2 o'clock this Friday. Is that something that you can do? Excellent. That's your to-do, Mike. Sales plan by 2 o'clock Friday. So you've had a really good conversation, but you've got to end it with some call to action that is actually documented. And then this is so critical. Someone in the meeting, not the leader of the meeting, because you've got other responsibilities, needs to be the note taker. Someone's got to capture what did we talk about today and then disseminate those notes out to everybody that was in the meeting or other interested stakeholders. So agendas, notes, being willing to say no, these are all things that we can use to manage what I call meeting madness. Because listen, in the corporate world that I come from before I started my coaching company, I really spent a lot of time doing that. And as soon as I got a handle on it, I freed up so much time to do what I needed to be doing. And I know there's not a priest or deacon on this call today that's not thinking, I would really like to have more hospital visits. I probably want to get in the confessional more. I'd love to go out and meet and greet people, but I'm stuck in meetings doing administrative stuff. Learn how to say no.
In another chapter, you talked about practical accountability, and you asked me not to make you quote from your book, but you had another formula in there related to practical accountability. I also think this is applicable. You mentioned sort of coming out of this meeting, asking folks, and I like the way you put it, you sort of phrase it as a question, asking, delegating really to the rest of the team to do things and asking them if the timeline that you put out is something that they can accomplish. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of accountability, not only for leaders, but also for team members? And I had the formula in front of me, so I'm happy to read that out. But could you talk about how personal ownership plays into accountability?
So the formula that Mike's referring to is effective business meetings plus practical clarity multiplied by personal ownership is what yields practical accountability. So if you've got good meetings, if you're having the right conversations, and I spotlight that because that's where we spend most of our day, right, is in meetings. So great meetings are a really great place to start. The second part, though, is you've got to have great clarity. As a leader, one of your most important roles is to give clarity. Let's unpack that a little bit. Clarity of vision. Where are we going? What's the purpose? Why are we doing this? What's this all for? Clarity of expectations. This is exactly what I'm expecting. One of the worst things a leader can do is say, hey, we've got to get morale up here before the end of the year. People aren't very happy. We got to fix that. Okay, that sounds great, but it's actually worthless. So how are we going to actually get morale up? You've got to be specific, be very clear about what you're expecting people to do. You've got to have clarity around task ownership. Okay, Mike, we've had a really good meeting today. You said you've got the sales plan 2:00 on Friday. Mike has a task. We all know the deadline. He owns it. Clear. But instead, if I said, hey, Mike, I need you to work on that sales plan. Can you get it to me in the near future? Not very clear. So clarity is so important. And then also role clarity. Do we know the specific jobs that we're supposed to be doing? This is bigger than just your job title. How many times as you're sitting here on this webinar today, have you been in meetings or just been in your businesses, your parishes where people got into each other's swim lanes, where we were crossing over and getting into each other's business? Well, when you've got role clarity where you really define what each person is supposed to do, that's another form of clarity that is a godsend to leaders. So effective business meetings plus practical clarity as manifested in the ways I just gave you. And then the multiplier is ownership. All of this is worthless unless you've got buy-in. Now, I assume, and it's dangerous to assume, if you're in ministry life, if you're in parish life, you're there because you want to serve the church. You want to serve Christ. You want to do something meaningful. God bless you. We are so grateful. I truly am. I lead a ministry. I absolutely know what kind of a commitment that is. So whenever you think about accountability, if you've got people on the team, maybe volunteers, maybe someone who's a little burned out, and they're not really showing ownership, that is going to diminish the ability for you to hold people accountable. Low ownership or zero ownership, it's really, really difficult to get accountability. So that's just another simple formula to give you great meetings, great clarity, and inspire ownership in others. That's one of the ways we can drive accountability in parish life and certainly in business life.
We had a number of questions come in that were focused from focused on folks that are in individual contributor roles. So I want to get to those here in a second,
Sure.
because I think there's some interesting threads to pull on. But before we get there, I want to cover a topic that you personally want to talk about. So we have a lot of Catholic leaders, obviously, on this call today. But for folks that are just very devout Catholics and maybe leaders in secular worlds, or if some folks also have leadership roles in a secular business or secular organization, can you speak to how those folks can be more confident in sharing their faith in those secular positions, especially when we look at a world that seems like it's more and more, frankly, anti-Catholic,
Mhm.
and Catholic, the name just doesn't always ring positively for people, unfortunately. Could you
Mhm.
speak to that, and maybe also how you do that yourself, because you are running Servium Partners, which you're not necessarily working with Catholics day in and day out.
Mhm. Sure. So, I think it's good to start with sort of an overarching sort of framework. We're made for heaven. We're not made for this world. And if you're in the business world, you're probably spending 8 hours of every business day, every eight awake hours during a business day in business. So if you're made for heaven and not this world, you can't ignore the business world as a place to live out your faith. But I think where we get into trouble is when we think about what does it mean to live out your faith. So Serving Partners, my coaching company, is not a Catholic company. I'm Catholic. I work with everybody. I work with agnostics, atheists, people that quite frankly hate the Catholic Church, Baptist, you name it. I work with everybody. But I don't begin by walking into the room with a Catholic banner. I don't have a headband that says I'm Catholic. I lead with kindness and love and joy. I meet people where they're at. I try to be a great listener. I do my very best to engage. And again, I say it again, listen. Now, I'm going to be really clear about what I believe, but I don't have to start a conversation with, I go to Mass 4 times a week and go to confession once a month. I don't lead a conversation with that. But if you ask me about ways I live out my faith, I will tell you everything you want to know. But my point is, if we start by listening, getting to know people, by being kind and loving, it's amazing how many people will ask you, where does that come from? Why do you do that? Randy, why are you so joyful? Randy, tell me a little bit more. I read in one of your blogs that you mentioned your prayer life. How do you pray? Why do you pray? Where does that come from? I find in my own experience that just by living an authentic Catholic life, and again, by quite frankly, living out the Beatitudes and doing what we're all called to do, that creates so many amazing conversations. So I would just challenge all of us to not overthink what it means to be Catholic in today's world. Just live out the gospel message daily. People are going to be drawn to you. The people that God wants to place in your path will be placed there, and you'll be able to work with them. One of the things that got me in trouble, I say trouble, it's an interesting word, when I first came into the church, is I felt led. I was writing a lot of Catholic books back then. I felt led to go all over the country and speak at every Legatus chapter in the United States. And I probably covered about 50 of them. And I think that was good work. I think it was useful. I think God used it. But I recognize that maybe I'm doing what I want to do and asking God to validate my decision. So I really pulled back from that and really just started, in my prayer, seeking his will. Lord, your will be done. What are you calling me to do? And what I felt increasingly led to do was the individual encounters that I'm blessed to have daily as a coach and a consultant. I work with senior executives every single day and their teams every day. And think about what a wonderful ministry the Lord has given me to show up as a faithful Catholic who's engaging with love and kindness and joy to the people that are given to me in my charge as clients. And I cannot tell you, I have countless conversations that have turned into great faith conversations by the approach I just gave you. So I feel the Lord has called me to those individual encounters, maybe much like you, and that's how I try to live my life. If I write something, if it's appropriate to talk about my prayer life or going to Mass on Sunday, I mention it in my business work all the time. Mike, you've read my books. You certainly probably know I'm Catholic from the books. But my point is, let's not overthink it. Let's not look at it as something that just can't be done. There's no question it can be done, and we are called to do it. But we all have to figure out a way to do it that's authentic, but also that is in God's will. And that's my advice to all of you. That's what's worked for me, and I pray and hope it works for you.
As I mentioned, we had a number of questions come through from an individual contributor standpoint. I found some of these interesting. The first one sort of harkens back to the conversation we were having a little bit earlier, but how would you effectively encourage a pastor who's not a natural born leader? This comment or question specifically said, this pastor is great at saving souls, but leadership is not his strong suit.
So I'm a big believer in the concept of candor. And when I use the word candor, it often makes people very nervous. There's often a negative connotation to the word candor. But I want us to look at candor through a very positive light. I think you'll all love this, but you know what the origin of the word candor is? It's candere, which is Latin for shine a light. So if we think about candor as shining a light on a problem, something that's in the darkness, something that's uncomfortable, instead of, oh my gosh, I've got to have this confrontation with my pastor. Instead, I'm going to have a conversation because I owe it to him to tell him respectfully what I think. So let's start with the premise that candor can be a very good thing. I believe it is. I want to give you something that I actually in one of my books I wrote about candor, and I gave you 12 best practices. I'm just going to give you 2 or 3 right now that are super helpful. One is, if you know me at all, I'm always candid. You know, Mike, you and I've talked twice now in 2 months. I'm pretty candid. I'll tell you what I really think respectfully. But I often, when I'm meeting people I don't know, or I don't really know what to expect from them, I will ask permission to be candid. Hey, Mike, I'd love to share an observation with you about something I saw yesterday. Are you open to hearing that? Now, what I just did is I respectfully, courteously asked Mike if I could share something with him. I didn't blurt it out. I didn't say, Mike, you sucked yesterday in the meeting. I asked for permission to share something. Now, in my 30-something years of practicing candor, no one has ever told me no. No one's going to say, well, no, I don't want to hear your observation. So what's happened is Mike is going to let his guard down, and he is going to let me in because I was very courteous and respectful. But that's only part of the equation. Now that he's let me in, I've got 2 choices. I could put a hand grenade on the table, which is, hey, Mike, your PowerPoint yesterday was terrible. Oh, gosh, you've got to work on that. Have a great day. Or, hey, Father Mike, I really think you're not doing a great job running the business side of the parish. You need to work on that. Have a good day. Probably not the right approach. So what we want to do is be helpful. You've let me in, but now I need to be helpful and constructive. Hey, Father Mike, I just want to share this observation. Thanks for the permission to do so. I've noticed that you are probably one of the most amazing pastors I've ever met. Our parish is blessed to have you. There are some things that seem to be falling by the wayside that I've got some expertise in. Would you mind if I sat down with you and the business manager and maybe talked about some best practices? I'd love to do it if it would help you, if it would help the parish. If you're open to that, I'd love to schedule a meeting for the 3 of us. May I do that? So I've pointed out a problem, but I immediately offered to help and be constructive. I didn't leave a hand grenade. So ask permission, and then once you're granted it, be helpful and constructive. Another element of this, Mike, the other side of the permission rule, is to give other people permission to be candid with you. Now, everybody assumes that everybody can be candid with them. That's not the case. People don't know they can be candid. So as a leader, as a pastor, I would encourage us to frequently mention, I truly want to hear from you. Pull me aside, set up some time with me, but I want you to know you've got my permission to tell me what you're really thinking. I'd love to hear from you. So pastors, leaders, whoever's on the call, it's not enough just to assume people can do it. You've got to sincerely give them permission. And then the brave ones, the courageous ones, will walk through that door and share that candor. And you've got to be careful not to overreact and not be defensive, because in that candor, you may learn something that's a game changer. I had no idea I was showing up that way. I had no idea that that was broken. So, by learning how to get candid feedback, you might learn something that will transform the parish and, quite frankly, your life. So, these are just a few elements that I would share with those people that are nervous about bringing up issues. Start with the candor rules and also just be helpful and constructive.
There's charity really underlining all of that,
Oh,
not only with the positive effects, but also in the approach of wanting to make a situation better or help someone become a better leader.
yeah. Mike, there was another chapter in one of my other books I wrote. The chapter was called "How Can a 12th Century Saint Teach Us About Candor?" And it's the story of Saint Thomas Becket. And if you remember back in 1162, I think he was on his way to his ordination as the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now we know he met a tragic demise, but this is before all that happened. And I'm going to paraphrase this badly, but he famously passed on what he said to his trusted friend who was walking with him. And I think I'll get most of this right. I want you to come to me in private and tell me when I err or when I make mistakes, because it is dangerous for men in power to not have honest and candid voices in their lives. I'm paraphrasing. But think about the wisdom of this. He was about to become the Archbishop of Canterbury, but he knew if he didn't have people giving him candid feedback, he could fail. He was going to struggle to not know what people were thinking and saying. So he invited someone to give him candor. There's a great saint example of how to do it right.
He followed your example.
There he goes.
He put it out there. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And you just mentioned St. Thomas Becket, but are there other saints that you frequently go to or ask for their intercession, specifically when it comes to leadership? I'm just sort of curious about that.
Absolutely. First and foremost, I asked for the intercession of Saint Omobono, who is the patron saint of Catholic business leaders. He comes from Verona in Italy in the, I think, 14th or 15th century. Famous in Italy and gaining some popularity here. But Saint Omobono is the established Catholic saint for business leaders. So I've got a saint card I'm looking at right now of him. Saint Jose Maria Escriva, I'm very fond of his writings, Opus Dei spirituality. I'm not in Opus Dei, but I love the work. Definitely, just the example of Saint Peter, for many reasons. He was a fisherman, but he also, quite frankly, gives me hope. Someone that stumbled, fumbled, and denied Christ 3 times. There's hope for me, in him. Saint Joseph the worker, always seek his intercession. And I think not so much for work, but for just clarity of what she taught and preached. St. Catherine of Siena. I often invoke her intercession. I read a wonderful book by a Dominican priest. I think it was, what was it? Saint of Freedom, of Mystic of Freedom, Saint of, anyway, I'll get it wrong. But it was a wonderful biography of her, and just her plain spokenness. She wasn't afraid to call out anyone, especially popes, who were in error. And I just love the clarity of her mission, and she's very inspirational to me. So those are just a few.
Yeah, excellent. One practice, it's related to what you just mentioned, one practice that we do here at Catholic, and we've put some content out about this over the years, and it's simple, is lead a lot of our meetings with prayer.
Yes.
Actually, almost all of our meetings are led in prayer here at Catholic. And I feel like, honestly, not only are we asking for divine inspiration and grace, which is so important, but it just drives this Catholic culture here at Catholic. And I think if that's something that parishes or dioceses aren't doing before their meetings, what a beautiful way to lift everything up to God, in those Catholic organizations where that's possible.
I can't imagine a place that needs it more. I mean, what a great example to set for everyone if we're doing that in our parishes. And I can tell you, I wrote a chapter about this in a book I wrote called The Catholic Briefcase years ago, but it was called Signs of Our Faith. And I always do a blessing before every meal. I don't care who my audience is. I'm not beating you over the head with it, but if the food is on the table, I'm going to say, Mike, I'm going to say a blessing. Would you like to join me? You don't have to join me, but this is how I practice my faith authentically. And I cannot tell you how many conversations, rich conversations, came out of just a simple blessing over a meal. Many of them were by people who I did not know were Catholic. I had just met them, and we had this great Catholic conversation. But there's something about a blessing over a meal that unlocks this secret handshake, I guess. I've also had people that have said, I walked away from the church, or, I don't believe in God. And it didn't turn into a battle. It just turned into an interesting conversation. We talked earlier about, how do I try to show up as authentically Catholic? Well, that's a very simple, easy way to honor the Lord and ask for a blessing, but also to open the door to a conversation that might not otherwise take place.
What a great witness. Yeah, such a simple thing, but it can open up a great conversation about faith. We have a few more questions that I want to cover, and then I want to wrap up by talking about your book and certainly mention where people can learn more about you, see your books, and potentially interact with you as well.
Sure.
But this question I thought was interesting. So it says, any suggestions for fostering bonds within a parish staff? But this person goes on to say they have almost two sets of teams with different leadership. They have a school and parish staff, which is under the parish. But how would you go about fostering bonds, not only within those individual teams, but also having them come together and honoring and respecting maybe the boundaries and leadership that exist?
Sure. So, I probably would hearken back to our earlier conversation about clarity. So let's say that you've pulled together these disparate elements, the parish group, the school group, and you really want to, rally them together. You want to cast vision, whatever it is. I think just be super clear about, hey, listen, there are three things I want to accomplish today. One, I want to build a community. I want all of us to understand and get to know and support each other. So first and foremost, I want to build a tighter community. So I'm speaking, I guess, in the voice of the pastor. Secondly, I want to see how we can help each other better. What can we do to support each other? So maybe, a few minutes in, I'm going to give you all a chance to go into breakout groups where you can get to know each other more on an intimate level and talk a little bit more about what you do. So you're getting them to talk in the meeting. And then I think, telling them what to do after the meeting. We've come together in community. We've learned about each other. We understand each other. So I want this to continue. We'll have another big meeting next month, but I want to challenge every one of you to spend time with someone that you normally don't and have a cup of coffee or a meal over the next 30 days. That's something that I've employed in my business life. But I guess what I'm getting at is just be clear about, I want us to have X, and this is how we're going to do it. And I want you to take what we learned today and practice it on your own. One of the things, and forgive me if I go on a tangent, I'll keep it short. One of the things that I worry about is we spend so much time in the wasteland of our iPhones. We are looking at screens. So I've seen some studies that say 6.5 hours a day are spent looking at screens. That's insane. It's just insane. And I think COVID exacerbated that. So we went from too much screen time to forced isolation. Well, Mike, I'm here to tell you, I'm not sure many of us emerged from that and got back to the way that we used to get together, build relationships, have coffee. We've gotten really comfortable being alone, working in silos, not reaching out to our neighbor. So I think as a pastor, as a deacon, anybody that's in charge of, promoting parish life, getting people together, even if they complain, even if they're not comfortable, hey, we are going to have donuts and coffee tomorrow, and I want to see everybody there, and I'm going to be asking everybody to answer one big question. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I can't wait to see you tomorrow. Like, find a way to get people together and help them rebuild that muscle that maybe has diminished a bit. So I think we need to really encourage community and getting together, because I think we've lost that skill along the way.
It's also a great way to rebuild a culture that, maybe has suffered from, we've done things this way for 2 decades. Going back to listening, as you said before, or hosting these coffee and donut days where the staff comes together. And it's a different dynamic that's almost forming from that. And putting that fun spin, having food there always helps, is such a great way to get people together, build that community, build the relationships, and also potentially turn around a culture that's maybe just stagnated for a while.
Yeah, like I'll give you an idea. This may be, something you all want to try, and it's certainly, and I can't remember which book it was. It may have been Upon Reflection, but I want to tell you the quick story of NASA back when. Remember when the two space shuttles exploded? Remember Challenger, and I believe it was Columbia. Challenger, it was heat shield tiles, and Columbia was O-rings. Well, NASA shut down the space shuttle program for years. And they did this very deep forensic analysis. They interviewed everybody involved, from the person that tightened the nuts on the shuttle to the executive director, everybody in between. And this is what they found that was quite startling. The issues with both shuttles were actually well known. They were actually known and acknowledged, but they were dismissed as, this is just the way that we do shuttle launches. We know that we've got some problems, but it's never caused explosions before. It must be okay. Well, let me get to the point of why I'm telling you this. They started calling that the normalization of defects. You probably know it as status quo thinking. That's just the way we've always done things around here. Hey, you know what? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah, we know that's not working, but we don't have a better way, so just leave it for now. That is a normalization of defects. So as a pastor, a deacon, anyone who is leading an initiative or leading a whole parish, think about how you can start to do your own forensic analysis of, what are we doing around here that we know we shouldn't? Where is the status quo thinking? If I were coming into a parish, that's the first thing I do, along with my listening tour, is I'm trying to figure out, what do we keep saying is okay that I know is not okay? And that becomes your defect list that you can start to attack.
This next question that I'd love to get your insights on is a topic that we want to come back to here on the Engaged Parish podcast, that has to do with parishes that unfortunately have to close, or we've been seeing this a lot across the country, are clustering into, having one pastor over multiple parishes. There's a whole bunch of different scenarios that we've seen from different dioceses. Those can obviously be very emotional situations, very difficult to lead through. So this question just very succinctly says, is there a smooth way, or any advice you could give, to soothe feelings when a parish church must close? And I'm assuming this is from the perspective of, maybe leadership at that parish, certainly the priest, in the communication with the congregation.
Mm. So I want to be really honest, Mike. I've never experienced that. I've been very blessed, my family and I, to belong to a parish that has known nothing but growth. And in Atlanta, where I live, we really haven't had parish closings. So where we are in this part of the country, that is just not an experience that I've had. I've heard of it. I've read about it. So I want to be very careful to let you know up front, I'm not speaking from experience. So I haven't even seen it. But as I think about this from a business perspective, hey, we've just gone through a reorganization, and we're going to shut down your division. We're going to move your division over here to work with this division. I can speak about it in those terms. I think we start with absolute transparency and honesty. We've really got to be thoughtful about, this is what's going on. We can't sugarcoat it. We don't have the numbers to support our parish. It is not, we're not blaming you. It's not your fault. We're not saying that you failed the parish. We're simply saying, this is the reality of today. Now, we still have a mission, which is to serve Christ and his church. I need your help in executing that mission. So we need to try to find a way to get our assets, our people, our parishioners moved over to St. Benedict's Parish around the corner. And I'm going to ask all of you to join me in that effort so we can continue to serve Christ and his church. So it's transparency. It's, this is what I need you to do. And it's continuing to bring people back to the overarching mission. But Mike, you and I know full well there's going to be sadness, frustration, anger, all those feelings, because we're human beings, will go through our minds. But I bet most of us got into ministry because of the desire to serve Christ and his church. And if we keep our focus on this isn't comfortable, but it's a burden that I know I'm not carrying alone because the Lord promised to share our burdens. I can do this. I have faith, and I'm going to help this new parish entity be the best it's ever been. And I hope that doesn't sound like Pollyanna, but if I were coaching a group of parish people doing this, that's what I would say, because that's exactly what I've said in the business world when I've had to merge divisions or close something down. And it's not fun, but it is probably where I'd go.
Mm. As I mentioned, this is a topic we want to circle back on at some point and cover here on the podcast, because I think it's one that resonates. Fortunately, we're seeing that not so much in the South, but in other parts of the country, this clustering and this closing, unfortunately, having to happen. So, unfortunately, on that note, I do want to transition into talking about your book, your latest book, right here, Becoming a More Thoughtful Leader, came out just last month. So this is hot off the presses. You've already written so many books. Could you speak to what inspired you to writing this one specifically, and what are some of the main points that are in this book that are sort of unique to this book versus the other ones you've written over the years?
I don't say this out of false humility. Sometimes I wonder how they get written, because I run a business, half another business. My oldest son has autism. I've got a busy family life. I'm not bored, but I've always, especially after I came into the church, I've always felt this need to share. What can I do to help you? What can I do to pour into you? And years ago, I was encouraged to share those, some of the things I was saying in talks, in blogs. I was asked to do some writing. And I started writing for a website called integratedcatholiclife.org that I co-founded with Deacon Mike Bickerstaff. And then that turned into a publisher noticing and saying, would you write a book for us? So God has continued to open doors for me over the years. And, as long as I've got the mental faculties and the energy, I plan to keep writing, because, Mike, what I try to do is I'm not here to write about theoretical things or things that, I wish we could do. I write about life. I write it through the lens of reflection. I'm not thinking about tomorrow. I'm thinking about what I'm going to learn from yesterday. I'm going to reflect today when I do my rosary about this webinar. This has been fascinating. I've enjoyed talking to you. So I'm going to be reflecting and mining the nuggets of gold from where I've been. And from that mining exercise, that's where my books come from. So I wanted to give you that context. I always write through the lens of where I've been, not where I'm going. And I also write in a raw, authentic way. If I think it, feel it, see it, experience it, it's going to go in the book. And hopefully, if you read these books, it's going to feel like we're having a cup of coffee together, because that's always my intention. This new book is 20 topics, all leadership focused, although I definitely talk about other things in there, life and family, and sometimes I mention prayer. But I talk about, for instance, the Confessions of a High Functioning Introvert in chapter 1. I wanted to maybe encourage other introverts that there is a different way to go with your life. And I give you my example. I wrote one chapter about the thoughtful gift from a friend of mine who sends me newspaper clippings. Who does that in this age? But I love and treasure every clipping, because it tells me that my friend was thinking about me and he took the time to mail me that gift. And it always makes me smile. And I wrote a whole chapter about the gift from a thoughtful friend. There's a chapter on patience. I'm trying to be more patient. So I wrote a chapter about 6 best practices on how to be patient. So, those are some of the things that you can expect. You've asked me a lot of questions today about engagement. There's a chapter about workplace connectedness. And I give the example of my 86-year-old father. And you know what my dad's great at? He smiles, he's kind, he thanks people for every kindness done for him. He will walk up to people he's never met at a fast food restaurant and say, "You're doing a great job today. Thank you." My dad is the epitome of the guy that just inspires and loves everybody. And I said, as leaders, why can't we be more like my dad? If you want to build better engagement, be the saint of kindness in the people around you. Let them see that loving, kind, joyful nature. And my dad's done it his whole life, and I think it's a great way to lead. So some of the things that you can expect.
Yeah, you mentioned, I have it bookmarked right here, reflecting on a gift from a thoughtful friend. that it was such a short chapter, but it really struck me. And I think it was in this book, you wrote specifically about the importance or just the authenticity of writing personal notes. And I think you said
Yes.
something like, if you haven't done that, start with trying to do at least 4 or so per month and then build up from there. And I thought about the times I've received personal thank you notes, and talk about a practical tip we can pull out of this podcast and discussion today. Even if someone sets their goal of writing a few before the end of the month, a few thank you notes, talk about that impact that, again, you outline it here in the chapter, but talk about that impact that it's had on you. And it's such a little thing, and it's something anyone can do, but man, it can drive relationships.
I want to give a shout out to Monsignor Peter. If you're listening, I love that you do this. I get thank you notes from him. My family does all the time. He is amazing. And we have 3,900, 4,000 families in our parish. He still writes thank you notes to everybody. And I'm amazed at that. And they're personal. It's not just a stamp. It's, hey, thank you for this thing you did. And I am so grateful. I keep every one of those. I keep every thank you note I've ever gotten in my life. I'm not kidding. Down here in my desk, I have a huge box filled with thank you notes. Why do I do that? Thank you notes are memorable. Thank you emails, thanks, delete. Okay, I appreciate that, delete. A thank you text, delete. Appreciate it. It's not worthless, but if you want me to remember that your gratitude, send me a thank you note. It stands out in my mind. So I write thank you notes for things that truly are memorable. I can't do them for every act of kindness, but I do have that goal of 4 times a month. I want to make sure a thank you note is leaving my desk. So I write them. I've got nice stationery. I put a little personal blurb about what it is that you did for me. And I let you know, Mike, I'm so grateful that you did this. And hopefully that brings a smile to your face. I felt joy doing it, but it's memorable. That's what thank you notes do for you. So you may be saying right now, I'm way too busy for that. Well, ask yourself, are my relationships good? Do I have trust? Maybe thank you notes could be a way that I could accelerate my relationships and trust with others. Just a thought.
I'm going to challenge everyone who's listening to try to write at least a couple today. I mean, it's such a simple gesture, whether you're a bishop in a diocese or an individual contributor. Think about someone that you can write a thank you note to. Even, our pastors, again, as Randy said, everyone's very busy, but, there's some parishioners who have gone above and beyond or given a very special donation recently where that personalized note can make a huge impact. What a simple thing we can all take away and try to incorporate into the next couple of days. Really appreciated that chapter. And I think it was like a page and a half. Excellent. Sure. Well, where can folks go to purchase your books?
Everything's on Amazon. That is always the fastest way to get the book. They're all available in paperback, some in hardback, and they're all ebook as well. So they're all there. And the only one that has just recently gone out of print is my first book, which is The Catholic Briefcase. But everything else is still in print and available. I'd be grateful to have you look at those. If you're in the business world, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I blog there almost every week. Integrated Catholic Life. I don't write as much Catholic writing, but I have hundreds of blog posts there, along with other much better Catholic writers than me. So those are really the key places to follow me.
Excellent. And I want to thank you again. Maybe this will be one of my personalized notes would be to you. You've given us 20, maybe a couple dozen of your various books and many copies of Becoming a More Thoughtful Leader. And again, I want to say to anyone who joined us live today, you've automatically been entered. You have automatically been entered to receive one of these books completely free of charge. Brandon's going to be following up in the next couple of days and letting you know if you're one of our selected winners. He'll ask you what book you'd like to receive, and then we will mail these out to you free of charge. So thank you so much for sharing these with us to give to our audience. Sure. Thank you so much for joining us again today, Randy. It was a great conversation and really appreciate your time. Is there any last thoughts you'd like to leave with our listeners today?
Thank you. It's been just a blessing to be here. I think there's one thing I would challenge all of us to ponder, reflect on, and then hopefully act on. I have a really good friend who's a very popular Catholic author and leader. His name is Andreas Widmer. And Andreas wrote a book years ago called The Pope and the CEO. He was actually a Swiss guard under JP2 who evangelized Andreas into the church. So I've known Andreas for years. He teaches at the Catholic University of America. He wrote the foreword for my book. And in it, he mentions a phrase that he taught me last year. And it's an Italian phrase. In English, we only have one word for love, love. And we don't talk a lot about love at work. It makes people uncomfortable. It's icky, oh, whatever. The Greeks have ways of looking at love. We know the different Greek words for love, but there is an Italian phrase that he taught me because the Italians are really smart about different nuances and ways of thinking about love. And he taught me ti voglio bene, ti voglio bene, which means I want your good. And it's a way of thinking about our colleagues in the parish, our colleagues at work. I want your good. So what if all of us today take up the mantle of ti voglio bene thinking? I'm going to go forth, and everything I do is through the prism of, I want what's best for you. I want your good. And it will transform how you see people, how you act with people. And quite frankly, I can't think of anything more consistent with Catholic teaching than ti voglio bene. So that's my challenge to everybody today. Go out and practice ti voglio bene.
Thank you again, Randy. And I want to remind everyone that we now have the Engaged Parish podcast. So if you're listening to this after the fact, please go to ecatholic.com/podcast. There you can see some of our latest and greatest episodes. There's also a little form if you scroll down the page. If you fill that out, you will be sure to get some exclusive content and also hear when we have these live conversations come up on our schedule. You can also ask our guests, like today we had Randy, specific questions when you register and hear about these events in advance. There's also some other goodies. So we encourage you to go there, sign up, and follow us on Spotify, follow us on Apple Podcasts, give us some likes. It goes a long way to continuing to promote this. And we'd also love to hear your comments. If you have anything to share with us or guests you'd like us to consider, please send it our way. We want this to be beneficial to the greater church. So with that, Randy, thank you once again, and God bless.
Thank you. God bless you as well.